World 3. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Colin Trevorrow! Hello. Hello, everybody. Put this here. Thank you. What's going on? This is fun. So a couple things. One, like this party got really good last night. We had a minute where we had a bunch of inflatable T-Rexes that we had a live DJ. It went off. Don't disappoint us tonight. I like that we have like a fan con with a bar. That's I think that's cool. Thanks for bringing bubbles. I love it. I can't tell you how good this is going to be. I'm so excited. We've done a couple things. One, I know that you guys just went up and watched Jurassic Park. You saw the first 5 minutes of our new film. Hope you enjoyed it. I've had the time of my life collaborating with Jay Bayona. He is brilliant. I think we have made a film that you all are going to love. I'm so excited for you to see all of it. But we are not here to talk about that. We're going to here to talk about Jurassic Park. I'm a deep fan of this. I love this. I love this movie. I saw this movie when I was 16 years old, and it was the first time that I'd like openly defied my parents. I snuck out of my house and I like put the pillows, under. I know you've done it, and I walked down because my friend was the projectionist at the movie theater, and he had to run it the night before, and so I got to sit in an empty movie theater all alone, and I watched this movie by myself as he ran it from the projection booth behind me. Yes, it changed the way that I looked at cinema. It changed the way that I looked at science, at paleontology, at our relationship with the Earth and with the planet, and so many of the ideas that we're working with now in the franchise. But all of the people who are going to sit here are legends to me, and I know they're legends to many of you, if not all of you, and I'm so excited to bring them out. The first one is one of the preeminent paleontologists in the world. He has been a consultant on this franchise from the very beginning, Jack Horner. Our next guest is somebody who I had the privilege of working with on Jurassic World. He has been involved with special effects and visual effects and creature modeling and animation from the very beginning. He worked on Star Wars, he worked on Willow, on Starship Troopers, on things that we all love, not to mention Jurassic. Phil Tippett. Next, we have one of the greatest producers of all time. He produced Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Bourne franchise, every Amblin movie that you loved, Goonies, Back to the Future, all of it. Jurassic Park. Frank Marshall is here. Okay. Check it out. Laura Dern. All right. So last night I had a bunch of questions and I sort of set them aside and we had a bit more of a conversation, and that's what I would like to do tonight. Let's the clever girl shirt. That's cool. Let's just talk about from the very beginning. There was a moment in all of your lives when Steven Spielberg approached you and said, "Look, we're going to make this dinosaur movie." And as a paleontologist, when someone said, "We're going to make a movie where they bring back dinosaurs and they're here with us in the modern world," what was that conversation like?
I don't know. You just called up one day and said, "Would you like to work on a movie?"
I said yes.
Steven Spielberg. Yeah, I said yes. He wanted me to make sure that the dinosaurs were as accurate, could be as accurate as they could be based on the science we had at the time. And he asked me to work with Stan Winston and his group and ILM and and Phil, and see if we could make dinosaurs look real. And I don't know, we kind of did, I think.
Phil, do you have a mic? Hold on, man.
We have an extra one.
Let's make sure he's got, yeah.
I have 3. What?
Well, look, when Steven said, "Look, we're gonna make dinosaurs," I know initially you were talking about doing them as go motion animated creatures, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the transition from.
Well, actually, the first call I got was from Kathy, who said, "We want to make this dinosaur movie, and we'll send you the galleys. But here's what we want to do: we want to shoot the dinosaurs practically as much as we can." Because Stephen had gone to Universal City or something and seen like a bunch of stuff that gave him the hope that maybe you could make a bunch of mechanical dinosaurs. And that was the path that Kathy was on. I was like, oh, man, I don't think so. And, why not? It was like, well, I don't have a good answer for you, but it's kind of like the same reason we can't have golf courses on the moon. It just, it doesn't, that can't happen right now. So it's going to have to be a mix of a bunch of conventional things. And one thing led to the next, and we were going to do everything very conventionally with high-speed miniatures and, the latest stop motion, go motion technology that we had. And then everything came unmoored and the digital revolution happened, and I was dragged into the future screaming and yelling.
Do you remember that moment?
I do.
Okay, tell us.
I do, and when Phil's talking about the galleys are what they call the book before it's a book. And Michael Crichton had brought this book to us at Amblin, and Stephen loved it and said, let's go make this movie. And that's when Kathy then started bringing together the creative components to do that, and one of them was to call Phil and ILM and Stan and all the rest of us, and we started doing a budget and a schedule and starting to put this together.
Laura, when we were up, we're up here, we've been looking down at you guys having fun down here, and we watched these raptors come out, and when it happened, you had like an actual physical reaction where you're like, I can't deal with it. Like it felt too real for you. Do you remember when the very first time when you had to either pretend to be looking at a dinosaur or you really were staring one down? Like, what was that like?
Well, yes, I was in trauma just above this experience, and our friend said, you can be with the raptors, like there's a virtual reality. I was like, I did the virtual reality. I don't need to have that experience. But I will never forget it, and I think it was extraordinary as people ask always what this experience was like the first time we made the film. It felt like this pioneered indie movie, because we were all there and these brilliant inventors were coming up with something that had never been done before, some of which was right in front of us thanks to Stan Winston, and some of it we had to imagine, and it was extraordinary. Sometimes we didn't know we were doing. Not that an X on a piece of paper isn't terrifying, and sometimes there was a raptor chasing us, or a tennis ball. Yes, true, it's diverse, but it was extraordinary.
5 miles an hour. Where does it break? Where does it look good? Just making aesthetic decisions and slowly pulling that into like this dinosaur Bible that would be the transitional kind of thing between what would become the computer graphics work and the Stan Winston work. And so then we were able to break it down between this is practical Stan, this is CG, blah, 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 blah. Just like old school, like King Kong. You just like, it's how movies have been made for a long period of time. And then the great thing that they insisted on was once we had this stuff on film, that the most important thing about the dinosaurs to begin with, in terms of their character, were their voices. And so we took these Bible studies that we did, and I went up and worked with Gary Rydstrom at Lucasfilm for the sound designer for like a couple of weeks, and ran these things. And Gary started, because we can't really start, you don't know the character without a voice, you know. And you don't want to, be animating things that go like, and like have a sound designer go, You really want to feel the nature of the character and the attack and decay, and how air is moving out from the lungs, and the snap of the jaws closes it off. And so, that was kind of our guiding light in figuring out who these characters were.
And I'm going to stay with you for a second, just to talk about the Raptors specifically, like the Raptors in the Kitchen sequence, where you actually, had John Rosengrant as a raptor in a costume. At that moment, this idea that dinosaurs were descended from birds was really introduced to the mainstream audience in Jurassic Park, and felt like a new idea at the time. How in tune with that were you when you were thinking about the motion of the raptors, and then what animals were you comparing them to?
That was an old idea that other people came up with, 10 or 20 years earlier. But no, I think, and Jack can talk to this, I mean, a lot of the extrapolation that you do to try and determine what these things might be is you look at the paleontological record. A lot of it is like 90% of your work is done in the bones. It tells you what to do. You just kind of have to like wind it up like a toy, and then extrapolate its water weight. How heavy is it? And is it like an elephant or a giraffe or an ostrich or whatever? And then just kind of do that. You guys do that, right?
Yeah, we do kind of do that. Yeah.
So Frank, like so much of, I've learned everything that I know about producing from Frank, and so much of producing is problem solving and trying to make sure that, that the filmmakers have the freedom to be creative without worrying about all of the stuff that happens and goes wrong constantly that has to be handled. As one of the best of that in the game, what are some things that happen on this movie that you remember that just had to get handled?
Well, I think right from the start, everybody's trying to accomplish Steven's vision. And at the beginning, because it was pre the breakthrough in CG, we were going to build, Steven said, I want to build the T-Rex, life-size T-Rex. And that's kind of where we started. And we all went, yes, sir. And Stan Winston looked at us like, have you lost your mind? And he wanted it to run. That was the other thing. So, we of course charged forward and thought, well, we can do this, but everybody was working on the problem, and that created the breakthrough up at ILM, and that's what we then had to readjust the way we're going to make the movie and do this Bible that Phil was talking about, where Steven went through and, he's a genius at this, where he said, this shot is just the foot, and this shot is just the mouth. And so we knew exactly what we had to create from the Bible, and that's how everybody worked together as a team to create the movie.
Did you feel were there limitations at all that allowed the movie to be better? Because I know this.
Absolutely. I mean, I always feel Steven gets more creative when he's put in a box and told he can't do something, and he gets more creative. The best example is you remember the swordsman in Raiders of the Lost Ark? That's a perfect example of that creativity coming from solving a problem.
Laura, I would just love to hear a little bit about your experience with Steven. As one of the things I admire the most about him is that, for all of his visual brilliance, his storytelling, he also knows how to communicate with actors, especially with children, but can help you find a truth in an otherwise completely fantastical and sometimes even ridiculous situation. What was that experience like?
Well, it's pure magic. We know he's extraordinary, and it's one of the great experiences of my life. And while Phil and many other brilliant men were working on the sound design, and Stephen was plotting the imagery for the film, we also had to start shooting the movie. And I will never forget, on the first day, I believe it was day one, we were in Hawaii, and we're lined up hearing a sound for the first time as we see rustling in the cage right before this thrashed, I guess almost like a gurney comes up where they had lowered down this goat, wasn't it a goat? And it's exciting.
Cow.
This cow, goat, cow. A coat.
I was gone.
A gal. But needless to say, we're there. It's so exciting. It's Stephen, this extraordinary cast. It's going to be inventive. We don't know what it'll look like when it all comes together. And we're all lined up. And on take one, we realize that we're all responding at different times to when we are supposed to hear the sound. So quickly, Richard Attenborough says, "Stephen, my dear boy, we need your help so that we're all aligned." And he's like, "Of course." I'm like, "Oh my God, Steven Spielberg, I'm acting and he's directing me. This is so amazing." So Steven's holding his megaphone and they roll camera. And we're lined up. Richard's to my right, and Alan Grant, Sam Neill, is there. And we look down and we're waiting for this moment to hear the first sound of the dinosaur that Phil's working on with a group of men somewhere else. And suddenly, in this moment, comes Stephen going, "Roar! Roar!" And I'll never forget Richard Attenborough looks at me and he goes, "Oh dear, do you think this will work?" It was like a moment of panic. But from that moment forward, magic did appear. And I have to say, speaking of the animatronics, on the day that I walk through this field and see that Triceratops, I genuinely started crying. It was one of the most beautiful creatures I've ever seen in my life. And watching the breath, its eyelids, its tongue, its mouth, I mean, the way it was moving and reacting, it was working with this extraordinary being. It was just mind-blowing. But day one was a little tricky. It was a little interesting.
I think an obvious question that I'm sure we asked all the time is, did you ever think that this movie was going to be, as big as it was? But I have a much more specific question for you as a character. Did you imagine when you were playing Ellie Sattler that character would go on to be one of the most iconic women in the history of film? And somebody the character is so important to so many. Did you have any idea?
Well, Stephen did say the first time we met to talk about it, he was like, "This is a movie with dinosaurs. These things are going to happen. This is maybe different than a David Lynch movie, but I'm just going to say this. We are going to invent a feminist that no one will forget." And I was like, "Oh, okay." It sounded amazing. And it's, an incredible privilege, thanks to this gentleman here and all the others involved, to have been part of it and to watch how Ellie and these characters live on. It's very exciting.
Question for you, sir. I think all of us in our different fields tend to learn through mistakes, through errors that happen, and then you find some kind of solution and ended up being better than anything you could have imagined. In your line of work, when it comes to consulting, it doesn't. You're science-based. There's not a lot of room for mistakes, and yet there were interpretations of what you felt dinosaurs should be, based on your understanding of them from digging them out of the ground with your bare hands. He actually mentioned, I said that we were going to be going to the Smithsonian to go deep in and look at all of the fossils and some that haven't even been identified yet. And he said, well, when you see the T-Rex, that one's mine. Which very few people can say. But I'm just really interested in hearing from you on the difference between dinosaurs as you understand them and the dinosaurs as they were represented in the film.
Well, first off, Stephen and I had a lot of conversations about what dinosaurs could do and what they couldn't do. And occasionally he took my advice. The cool thing about paleontology is all of the animals that I work on, including the Tyrannosaurus Rex, are dead. They're just skeletons. We don't really know that much about them. We do a lot of science and we guess a lot, but Stephen had a kind of a thing where he said, if you know for sure that something is wrong, I will fix it. But if you don't know for sure, if scientists don't really know, then I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make a good movie. And I thought that was pretty cool, actually, because I do the same thing in science, right?
Yeah, Jack actually busted me in front of Spielberg one day because I had done some tests where I was thinking, okay, well, the Crichton thing, they steal frog DNA and whatever. And so I'm looking for an acting trope for the raptors. What would be really cool as a thing, as a beat, is to give them a lizard tongue that snakes out and tests the air. And it's this really a cool looking thing. And so I brought it in and Jack said, that would not happen. They are birds. They are not lizards. And I'm oh, come on, Jack. This is DNA sorcery bullshit. But Stephen was very adamant at saying, no, you know what, I really want this to be, I don't want to play, and you've got to get to this point with the director sooner than later, what are you doing? And it answered the question. It was I want these to be animals, not monsters, and I want them to be sanctioned by the paleontological community. That's what we're doing. It was I got it now. I think the tongues would be great, but
we filled in with something better, right? So what we filled in with was the raptors coming to the window and snorting and fogging up the window, which only a warm-blooded animal can do.
Didn't know that. And the tongue thing, I think, I can see his wheels turning already.
It's I think, and Steve and I have talked about this a lot. It seems like the rule that we've ended up with on all of these movies is, at least for me, is I don't want the dinosaurs to do anything that another animal that currently exists couldn't or wouldn't do. And as long as we can keep it within the realm of living animals that we know, they're not dragons, they're not monsters. But I feel that same amount of pressure in creating the balance between science and entertainment, and it's one of the weights that's kind of always been on the shoulders of this franchise that you have to think about all the time. Frank, I was mentioning mistakes, and I think some of the kinds of, not really errors, but unexpected things that happen on movies are weather, storms. I've heard a story from Kathy involving a whole plane coming in to take people off the island.
Yes.
Tell me about all that.
Well, it's actually kind of wild. How about the volcanic eruption that's happening right now? It's part of our advertising campaign on Fallen Kingdom, just to get everybody's attention.
No one has been hurt.
Yeah.
Please.
Evacuations have happened.
Good.
It's all good. It's kind of a famous story, Hurricane Iniki coming in. And I do take a little credit for getting the crew off of the island, because before Kathy and I met, she was not a runner. And she began running because I was a runner, and she was in great shape. And once the hurricane hit, and there were trees and debris and everything over the roadways, and nobody could get to the airport, she ran 5 miles to the airport on Kauai, somehow commandeered a plane to take her to, well, she's a smooth talker. She got her way to Honolulu. She figured out what was needed back on the island and how to get a 727 back to the island, and they needed supplies, mostly food. She talked to a guy from Safeway. She got some food on the plane. She jumped back on. They went back to Kauai. Everybody was lined up at the airport. They got on the plane, and suddenly she looked up in the cockpit, and guess who was flying the plane? Jock. Jock, Fred from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Jock, who was sitting fishing on the float plane at the beginning of the movie. He was a commercial pilot. He flew for Hawaiian Air, and then he realized what the crew was. And so as they took off with the crew from Jurassic Park, said, "Hello, I'm Fred, your pilot." Da 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 da.
And you know what? Because of what Kathy did, if she wanted to run for president, I would tell everybody to vote for her. Because
We're not doing that.
a big mistake.
You guys have enough franchises. A lot to deal with. No, it's amazing. Like the act of producing is something that's so vague to a lot of people. It's really hard to understand specifically what it is. And that story, it's not the only thing, but if you want to know what, hardcore on the ground producing is, it's that you're FEMA.
Well, and that's what happened because when you're a movie crew, you're a little army and you have everything. And so the crew, while Kathy was gone, was helping everybody on the island. They had chainsaws, they had trucks, they had tools, they had water. Alcohol, the most important thing. And they were ready to go when she came back with the plane. But making a movie is problem solving.
To stay on the hurricane for a second, tell me about the experience of the actors, because that's, if you have given yourself to a character and you're that person.
For the island of Kauai. And then that first night we were paired up, and Stephen, just because we had time to kill, and this just makes me I just love this so much, I guess was bored and can't stop directing. He had a flashlight. We had a little emergency kit, and he had a flashlight in it. And he goes, "Laura, come here." And he puts me in front of the mirror of the bathroom in this tiny room, with one section of the hotel had been untouched. And he stands me in front of the mirror with the flashlight, and he goes, "Okay, love story, horror film. Love story, horror film," and starts lighting me. And he's like, "Okay, say this line." And I'll be like, "Yes, my dear." And he's lighting me as though, then he gives me a scenario, and he's like, "Okay, the dinosaur's coming." And I was like, "Oh my God, you cannot stop directing, even in the middle of an emergency." I thought it was the most amazing thing ever. But he was always at play and always an inventor. And I think somehow that kept such calm for everybody. And as well, he was, I think, the last voice on the radio. Remember that? To Los Angeles, they had NPR or something. Do you remember? And he was on the radio, and then it cut out, and everybody didn't know what had happened, and it was quite terrifying. But we were incredibly bonded. It was an amazing experience to go through something like that as a group.
He would send guys out, the doors of the hotel
Into the storm.
in the storm, and some of the shots are in the movie,
Yeah,
right? Of
yeah.
the breakwater and all that stuff, and there would be it was like a fucking hurricane, and there would be these giant pieces of aluminum that were like razor blades, 4x8 sheets going blah 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 through the air, and they would be out there grabbing stuff.
No, and it was the day before they would finish. There was one day left, and they didn't make it. They had to come back to finish. Pretty amazing.
It's incredible. So you go through all of this, going through any movie, it is an ordeal. You're pushing a giant boulder up a hill, and yet you get to the end of it, and now here we are 25 years later, and you're looking out at all of these people who genuinely love this thing that you all created over the course of that experience. What is it that made this movie, beyond most all other movies ever, create this kind of love?
I don't know. We have to ask them. Dinosaurs, right?
It's the dinosaurs, because they were with us at some point, I think. That's what makes a difference. It's science fact fiction that we're creating now. But that guy was here one day. And that's, I think, and there's the science of it and the paleontology that we all learned in school, and it's cool now we get to see them actually tell the story.
And the magic of that experience, of us coming up to the crest in the Jeep, and just like you, the cast, we had a screening with Stephen and Frank to see what we were actually seeing there. And the first time, like you, that I saw what they had invented, we were all in tears. It's the most beautiful, extraordinary image I've seen in a movie. I was so moved by it. So it was such a blessing to be part of what everybody worked together to invent, because, as you all say, that's what we all were in love with.
We got really lucky, to have Stephen there. But, when you've done enough of these things, you actually never really know until it's all glued together. And so Kathy invited me and Dennis Mirren down, and I think it was like one of the answer prints at Amblin. And so it was just us in the screening room, and she ran the movie. And she goes like, "What do you think?" And I go, "It's not terrible." And she goes, "That's what I thought, too." And that's like the greatest thing that you can feel as a filmmaker, when you realize that you've worked on something that didn't disappoint you one way or the other. It was actually special.
Well, there's so many things that go into it, including the music. I mean, where would we be without John Williams? Without this theme that's starting to drive me crazy here, but it's...
Drive you crazy, you know how often
But yeah, so at that moment, when you see it, now there's this theme that we all know in our sleep. So it's all of these elements coming together, and you really don't know until they're all together.
I'm going to answer my question. For me, I feel like there's a humility that's in them. I mean, there are other movies with dinosaurs in them, but to me, there is a humility in these movies of us in the shadow of these creatures that were here before us, that are so magnificent and just remind us. We even have a line in one of our movies, remind us how small we are and how new we are. And I think that in all of the work that you did, that humility is infused into the film. We recognize that this story we're telling is bigger than us. And look, the legacy that all of you have left behind, I think, is evidenced here. It's evidenced in all of your kids who are going to watch this movie and who have seen some now for the first time. It's humbling for me to be up here with you. So thank you so much for coming and sharing all of this. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you. Good night. And good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. That was fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for these legends, our panel, and your moderator, Colin Trevorrow. That was amazing stuff. That's really cool information, especially the stuff about the hurricane, and she ran 5 miles and all of that. That was really great. Now here's what's going to happen. At 10:25, we are going to have a costume contest. So those in